They tried to move my house while I was out of town, and for a second, when I first heard it, I actually thought it was a joke, like one of those dumb small-town rumors that somehow grows legs and starts walking on its own. Except this one wasn't a rumor, and by the time I got back, they had already started building the thing they were going to use to do it. Not metaphorically either, not like paperwork or zoning or some legal trick. I mean physically lift my cabin off the ground and rotate it like it was a piece of furniture in their living room. I live up on a hillside just outside a little mountain town most people have never heard of, the kind of place where people wave even if they don't know you, and you can go a whole afternoon without hearing anything but wind through the trees and the occasional truck climbing the ridge. 10 years ago, I bought 9 acres of uneven land up there, mostly slope and rock, not the kind of property developers fight over, but it had one flat patch, just enough to build something small, and I built my cabin right there with my own hands, bolted the posts deep into bedrock, spent weekends and winters getting every beam right, every angle solid, because out there, if you cut corners, the mountain reminds you. That place isn't just a house to me. It's 10 years of quiet mornings, long nights, a couple bad winters I barely made it through, and a lot of moments where I figured things out about myself I didn't even know I needed to figure out. Nobody bothered me up there, not really, until about a year ago, when the empty lot next to mine finally sold. I remember the day I first saw them, black SUV, California plates, dust kicking up behind them like they were arriving in some kind of movie. The couple that got out didn't look like they belonged there, not in a bad way exactly, just out of place. Clean clothes, expensive boots that had never seen mud, sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Their names were Ethan and Lila Cross, and within about 10 minutes of introducing themselves, Ethan was already talking about unlocking the potential of the land and reimagining the mountain experience. I just nodded, because people come and go up there all the time. Most of them leave after the first real winter anyway. But Ethan, he wasn't that kind of person. You could tell right away he was used to things bending around him. Not asking, not negotiating, just deciding. The first time I had a real problem with him was maybe 2 weeks after they moved in. I was out splitting wood when I heard this buzzing sound overhead, kind of high-pitched, like a mosquito that wouldn't go away. I looked up and there it was, a drone, hovering right over my cabin, dipping lower, tilting like it was inspecting something. I walked out into the clearing and waved my arm, not aggressively, just enough to signal, hey, that's my space. A minute later, Ethan came walking down the slope from his side, holding a controller, smiling like we were about to share a beer instead of have a problem. Hey man, he called out, casual as anything, just mapping the terrain. I pointed up at the drone. Yeah, that terrain includes my house. He laughed, not apologetic, more like amused. Oh, come on, it's just for planning. Nothing personal. I held his gaze a little longer than he expected. It is personal. It's my land. Keep it on your side. For a second, just a second, that smile slipped, like he wasn't used to being told no. Then it came right back, smoother this time. Sure, he said, nodding, no problem. He pulled the drone back, but as he walked away, I got this feeling I couldn't quite shake, like I hadn't actually won anything, just delayed something. Over the next few weeks, the noise started. Trucks, equipment, crews coming in early, leaving late. They were building something big, way bigger than anything else on that ridge. I'd catch glimpses through the trees, steel beams, concrete pours, the kind of project that doesn't just sit on land, it dominates it. One afternoon, I ran into Lila at the edge of the property line. She was holding a set of plans, glossy paper, full color, the kind architects use when they want to impress clients. It's going to be a lodge, she said, almost glowing. Glass walls, open concept, sunrise-facing deck. We're designing it to capture the full sweep of the valley. I nodded, polite. Sounds like a lot. She smiled. It's going to be incredible. Once everything lines up. That phrase stuck with me. Once everything lines up. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured she meant the usual construction headaches. Then I had to leave town for a few days. Work stuff, nothing unusual. I locked up the cabin, did my usual walk around the property, checking things, making sure everything was how I left it. Because when you live out there, you get into that habit. You trust your routines. 3 days later, I came back just after sunrise. And the second I turned onto my dirt driveway, something felt wrong. You ever have that moment where your brain notices something before you can explain it, like a picture that's almost right, but not quite. That's what it felt like. Then I saw it. There were trucks parked along my driveway. Not just one or two, a whole line of them. Heavy machinery, equipment trailers, men in reflective vests walking around like they belonged there. And about 10 feet from my cabin, right where the ground dips slightly toward the slope, there was a steel frame structure going up, thick beams, bolted together, like the skeleton of something industrial. For a second, I just sat there in my truck, engine still running, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Then I got out. As I got closer, I could see orange markings spray painted on the ground around my cabin, lines, measurements, arrows. My cabin. My land. One of the crew guys glanced at me, then looked back at what he was doing like I was just another part of the scenery. I walked straight up to the nearest guy with a clipboard, mid-40s, hard hat, the kind of face that's seen a lot of job sites. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What exactly is going on here?" He flipped a page on his clipboard, not even looking up at first. "We're prepping the lift site." I blinked. "The what?" Now he looked at me, like I'd just asked what the sky was. "The lift site," he repeated. "We're scheduled to rotate the structure 10 degrees. Improves the sight line for the adjacent build." It took a second for the words to land. Rotate the structure. "My structure?" I asked. He checked the paper again. "Cabin on parcel 17B. That you?" There was this moment, right there, where everything kind of went quiet, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. "Yeah," I said slowly. "That's me." He nodded, satisfied. "Great. We'll be lifting it later this week. Should only take a couple hours." I stared at him. "You're planning to move my house," I said, not even a question anymore. He shrugged, like it was routine. "Just a minor rotation." And that's when I felt it. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder than that. Something that settles in your chest when you realize someone has crossed a line so far they don't even see it anymore. I pulled my phone out and stepped away, dialing Ethan's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey neighbor," he said, cheerful, like we were still in that first conversation by the trees. "I was meaning to call you." "Yeah," I said, watching the crew walk around my cabin like it belonged to them. Funny timing. He laughed lightly. "Look, I'm sure the guys already filled you in. We're just realigning things a bit, optimizing the layout. By moving my house." A pause. Not long, just enough to be deliberate. "Rotating," he corrected, almost gently. "It's a minor adjustment. Honestly, it benefits the whole valley." I looked at my cabin, the place I'd built piece by piece, and then at that steel frame rising beside it. "You didn't ask," I said. Another pause. "Well," he replied, tone shifting just slightly. "Sometimes it's easier to just move forward and sort things out after." That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision, and I was the only one who hadn't been included. I hung up without another word, stood there for a second longer, then turned back toward my truck, already knowing exactly what I was going to do next. Because if they thought they could just come onto my land and move my house like it was an inconvenience, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't say another word to the crew after that, didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't try to physically stop anything. Because I've learned over the years that when something crosses from stupid into dangerous, the worst thing you can do is react too fast. Instead, I just started taking pictures, everything. The trucks, the markings, the steel frame, the guys working, even the license plates. One of the workers asked me what I was doing, and I told him the truth. Documenting what's about to cost somebody a whole lot of money. He didn't laugh. The drive down the mountain felt longer than usual, like every turn was giving me more time to replay what Ethan said. Sometimes it's easier to just move forward and sort things out after. That wasn't confidence. That was entitlement. The kind that comes from living in places where money smooths everything over, where problems aren't solved, they're absorbed. Karen Whitaker's office sits above a hardware store in town. Nothing fancy, creaky stairs, a door that sticks a little when you push it open. But Karen doesn't miss things. She's the kind of lawyer who reads everything twice and still finds what everyone else overlooked. When I walked in, she looked up over her glasses, saw my face, and didn't even ask me to sit before saying, "What happened?" I handed her my phone. She took it, started flipping through the photos, and about 5 seconds in, her eyebrows pulled together. 10 seconds, she stopped scrolling. "Tell me this is exactly what it looks like," she said. "It is." She leaned back in her chair, exhaled slowly, then leaned forward again like something had just snapped into place. "Okay," she said, calm but sharp now. "We're not dealing with a misunderstanding." "No," I replied, "we're not." She reached for a file cabinet, pulled out my property records, survey maps, boundary lines, documents I hadn't looked at in years, but she clearly kept ready. "Your cabin is entirely within your parcel," she said, tracing a line with her pen. "No easements, no shared access, no development rights granted to adjacent owners." Which means, she tapped the page, this is trespass. This is interference with a fixed structure. And depending on how far they go, this could qualify as attempted conversion of real property. I let out a quiet breath. In plain English? She looked up at me. They're trying to take control of something that isn't theirs. There it was, clean, simple, undeniable. Karen didn't waste time. She started drafting a cease and desist right there, dictating parts of it out loud as she typed, her tone precise, almost surgical. Immediate halt to all unauthorized activity, removal of equipment, restoration of site conditions, notice of potential damages. Then she paused, looked at me. "We're also filing for an emergency restraining order. I don't want them getting anywhere near that cabin again." "Good," I said, because the thought of them actually trying to lift it, even attempting it, made something in my chest tighten. By the time I left her office, the paperwork was already moving. Emails sent, filings prepared, copies delivered. Karen didn't do slow. What I didn't expect was how they responded. The next morning, I got an email forwarded from Karen. Different letterhead this time, glossy, polished, the kind of firm that lists awards before names. Beverly Hills address. I read it once, then again, slower. They didn't deny anything. They didn't apologize. Instead, they framed the whole thing like a collaborative improvement project. Aesthetic realignment. They called it, claiming that adjusting my cabin's orientation would enhance the visual harmony of the surrounding properties, increase overall land value, and contribute positively to the shared landscape experience. I actually laughed when I read that part, not because it was funny, but because it was so disconnected from reality it felt like satire. Then I got to the line that made me stop. They suggested that I share in the cost. Not just accept it, pay for it. I called Karen immediately. "Tell me I'm reading this wrong," I said. "You're not," she replied, and I could hear something in her voice now, something tighter than before. "They're positioning this as a mutual benefit. They're trying to move my house without permission." "I know," she said, "and they're hoping to bury that fact under enough language to make it sound reasonable." I leaned against the wall, staring out the window. "So what now?" "Now," she said, "we stop asking." That afternoon, she filed the motion. Everything after that moved fast, faster than I expected for something involving courts and paperwork. By the next day, we had a hearing scheduled. Emergency basis. The courtroom was small, quiet, the kind of place where even your footsteps feel too loud. Ethan and Lila were already there when I walked in, sitting with their attorney, sharp suit, confident posture, the whole package. Ethan glanced over at me, gave a small nod, like we were still neighbors having a minor disagreement over a fence line. I didn't nod back. When the judge came in, Judge Ellison, older guy, calm face, the kind of person who doesn't need to raise his voice to control a room, everything shifted. Karen presented first. She didn't dramatize anything. She didn't need to. She just laid it out. The property lines, the photos, the lack of consent, the physical preparations already underway. Then she paused, just for a second, and said, "Your Honor, they are preparing to physically move my client's home without permission." You could feel the room tighten around that sentence. The other attorney stood up, adjusted his jacket, and started talking about design cohesion and mutual enhancement and minimal structural impact. Like this was some kind of landscaping dispute. Judge Ellison held up a hand. "Counsel," he said, voice even, "are you telling me your clients intend to alter the position of a residential structure they do not own?" A beat. The attorney hesitated, just slightly. "They intend to improve." "That's not what I asked." Silence. Then, quieter. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked down at the photos for maybe 10 seconds. That was it. 10 seconds of stillness. Then he looked back up. "No," he said. "Just that. No build-up, no explanation." Then, more formally, the court issues an immediate restraining order. All activity within 100 feet of the plaintiff's structure is to cease. All equipment is to be removed within 14 days. Failure to comply will authorize the plaintiff to take necessary action for removal, with all associated costs recoverable from the defendants. The gavel came down, and just like that, everything changed. Outside the courtroom, Ethan caught up to me. "You didn't have to escalate this," he said, tone controlled but tight now. I stopped walking, turned to face him. "You were going to move my house," I said. He shook his head slightly, like I was still missing the point. It was a minor adjustment. It was my property. He held my gaze, and for the first time, there was no smile, no polish. "You're being difficult," he said quietly. I let that sit for a second, then nodded once. "Good." And I walked away. For the first time since this started, I felt something settle. Not relief, not yet, but direction. The line had been drawn, officially now. 14 days. That's what the court gave them. 14 days to fix what they never should have started. I went back up the mountain that evening, half expecting to see the crew packing up, machinery rolling out, the steel frame coming down piece by piece. But when I pulled into my driveway, nothing had changed. The trucks were still there. The structure was still standing. The orange markings still circled my cabin like some kind of outline for a future they had already decided on. I sat there for a long moment, engine off this time, just listening. Wind through the trees, metal clinking somewhere as someone adjusted something on that frame. 14 days, I told myself. Maybe they were just slow. Maybe they needed time to organize, to dismantle safely, to comply properly. But something in the back of my mind, that same feeling I had when Ethan smiled the first time, it didn't believe that. Day 5, no change. Day 9, still nothing. I ran into one of the workers at the edge of the property. Same guy with the clipboard. "Thought you'd be packing up by now," I said. He shrugged, uncomfortable. "We go where we're told." "Who's telling you to stay?" He hesitated, then looked past me, up toward Ethan's property. "That guy signs the checks." Of course he does. By day 12, the tension had shifted from confusion to something sharper, anticipation. Not "there's mine," because the order wasn't a suggestion. It was a deadline, and deadlines, unlike people, don't negotiate. Day 14 came and went. Not a single bolt moved. No trucks left. No dismantling started. Just the same setup, sitting there like the court's decision was nothing more than background noise. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was worried, but because I was done waiting. At sunrise on day 15, I was already on the road back down the mountain. Not to ask questions this time, not to take pictures. This time, I was going to act. By the time the sun crested over the ridge that morning, I was already halfway back up the mountain. Except this time, I wasn't alone. Karen was behind me in her car, and behind her was a convoy that definitely didn't belong in a quiet place like ours. 2 excavators on trailers, a flatbed truck, a pickup loaded with cutting gear, and a crew that looked like they'd been pulled off a demolition site, not a construction one. No music, no drama, just engines, gravel, and purpose. Karen had handled the notifications the night before, sheriff's office, court documentation. Everything lined up clean and by the book. If anyone tried to stop us, we had the order in writing. Not a gray area, not open to interpretation. I remember gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual as we turned onto my road. Not out of nerves exactly, more like awareness. That quiet understanding that once this started, there was no undoing it. When we rolled up to my property, the site looked exactly the same as it had the day before, like time had frozen just to prove a point. Steel frames still standing, equipment still parked, the outline of their plan still wrapped around my home like it belonged there. It didn't. I stepped out of the truck, the cold morning air hitting a little sharper than usual, and for a second I just stood there, looking at my cabin, same as it had always been, solid, unmoved, exactly where I built it. "All right," I said, mostly to myself, then turned to the crew. "Let's get to work." No speeches, no countdown, just motion. The welders were first, sparks cutting through the quiet as they started slicing into the joints of that steel frame. The sound was loud, aggressive, the kind of noise that doesn't ask permission. Within minutes, the first beam came loose, dropped to the ground with a heavy, final kind of thud. The excavators followed, slow at first, then with more confidence, grabbing sections of the structure, pulling them apart like it was nothing more than scrap waiting to be sorted. Bolts snapped, metal twisted, Everything that had been so carefully assembled now coming undone piece by piece. I walked the perimeter while they worked, watching closely, not because I didn't trust them, but because this was my land, my home, my problem to finish. One of the crew guys looked over at me at one point and said, "You sure about all this?" I nodded. "Court says I can remove it." He gave a half smile. "Yeah, but most people don't actually follow through." I glanced back at the steel collapsing in sections. Most people didn't have someone try to move their house. That seemed to settle it. Next came the equipment blocking my driveway. Chains hooked, engines revved. One by one the machines were dragged out, repositioned, loaded up. It wasn't clean, not neat, but it was effective. The orange markings on the ground, gone under dirt and tire tracks. The stakes around my cabin, pulled up and tossed aside. By midday, the structure that had been standing there for weeks, that had felt like a threat just by existing, was reduced to a scattered pile of steel and debris. And then even that started disappearing, loaded onto the flatbed, hauled off like it had never belonged there in the first place. I was standing near the edge of the clearing when I heard the sound of another engine approaching, faster than the others had been. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan's SUV came to a hard stop just short of the driveway, dust kicking up around it. He stepped out before the engine even fully cut, Lila right behind him, both of them taking in the scene like they'd just arrived too late to stop something they never thought would actually happen. Ethan walked straight toward me, his face already flushed, jaw tight. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice either. "Cleaning up my property." He gestured wildly behind me at the crew, the machines, the emptying space where his project had been. "That's our structure. You can't just destroy it." I reached into my jacket, pulled out a folded copy of the court order, and handed it to him. "You had 14 days. He didn't take it at first, just stared at me like the paper itself was an insult. "We were working on a solution," he said, forcing the words out. I tilted my head slightly. "By doing nothing?" That hit. He grabbed the paper, scanned it quickly, like maybe the words would be different this time. "You went too far," he said, quieter now but sharper. I let out a small breath, glanced back at my cabin, then back at him. "No," I said. "You did." For a second, neither of us said anything. Behind me, another section of metal dropped onto the truck with a loud crash, like punctuation. Lila stepped forward then, her voice cutting in, controlled but strained. "Do you have any idea how much this cost us?" I looked at her, really looked this time, not just the frustration, but the disbelief, like this outcome had never even been on the table in her mind. "Yeah," I said. "You're about to find out." They didn't stay much longer after that. There wasn't anything left to argue over, not really. By late afternoon, the last truck pulled away, and just like that, it was over. No frame, no equipment, no markings, just my cabin, sitting exactly where it had always been, surrounded by churned-up dirt and fresh tracks, but untouched. I stood there for a while after everyone left, the quiet settling back in slowly, like the mountain was reclaiming itself. Karen walked up beside me, hands in her coat pockets. "Well," she said, glancing around, "that's one way to enforce a court order." I huffed a small laugh. "They had their chance." She nodded. "They did." For a moment, we just stood there, no rush to leave. Then she added, "You know they're not done, right?" I looked over at her. I figured, and she was right. A week later, I got served. Ethan was suing, damages, delays, destruction of property. The number was somewhere around 120,000. I didn't even react when I read it, because at that point, it felt predictable. The hearing didn't take long. Same courtroom, same judge, same quiet weight in the air. Their attorney started in, laying out their argument, talking about losses, timelines, investments, but he barely got through the opening before Judge Ellison held up a hand. "I've reviewed the prior order," he said. The attorney tried to continue. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not." Silence. The judge looked directly at Ethan this time. "You were given clear instruction to remove unauthorized structures from property you do not own," he said. "You failed to comply." A beat. The plaintiff acted within the authority granted by this court. Another beat. Case dismissed. Gavel. That was it. No long speech, no drawn-out battle, just over. Outside, Ethan didn't even look at me this time as he walked past. Lila either. And honestly, I didn't feel victorious. Not the way you'd expect. It wasn't satisfaction, not really, more like balance restored. Something that had been pushed too far snapping back into place. I went back up the mountain that evening. Same road, same turns, but it felt different. Quieter. Like something had been settled in a way that didn't need words anymore. The cabin was right where I left it that morning. Same angle, same view, same everything. And yeah, if you stood on Ethan's side of the property, I guess the sunrise wasn't perfect anymore. But it was mine. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. Ethan never thought of himself as the bad guy. Not once. In his mind, he was improving something, optimizing, aligning, making things better. And maybe that's the part that sticks with me the most. How easy it is for someone to cross a line when they convince themselves it's for the greater good. So I'm curious. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Would you have torn it all down the second you had the right? Or would you have waited, tried to work it out, given them more time? And on the other side of that, at what point does vision turn into entitlement? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor who thought your property was somehow part of their plan, yeah, I definitely want to hear that story too.